What happens when one of Hollywood's most charismatic stars, known for his sharp wit and unshakable composure, suddenly loses control on live television? What happens when Jamie Foxx, the man who can make anyone laugh, is pushed just a little too far by a question he never expected? You're about to witness that moment. The day a seemingly routine morning talk show turned into a moment of raw emotion and unforgettable confrontation. The studio lights of The View burned down on the iconic glass table as the audience settled into their seats. The air was charged, not with excitement, but with an odd, buzzing tension that only the live taping of a talk show can bring. Cameras rolled smoothly along their tracks, red recording lights glowing like watchful eyes. The smell of hairspray and stage coffee lingered in the air. Jamie Foxx sat in the guest chair, smiling politely but with that glint of mischievous charm he's known for. He had been on countless shows before, late night, morning television, even political roundtables. But something about this visit felt different. Maybe it was because he was promoting a deeply personal new project, a dramatic film that touched on themes of resilience and trauma. Maybe it was because he had been avoiding certain topics in recent interviews, topics he hoped wouldn't surface today. Joy Behar sat opposite him, leaning slightly forward, her hands clasped. To anyone who didn't know her, her expression looked warm, almost friendly. But her colleagues knew that look. It was the look she got when she was about to ask the question everyone else was too polite or too cautious to bring up. Sunny Hostin flipped through her note cards, pretending not to notice the quiet intensity building at the table. Whoopi Goldberg, the season moderator, sat back in her chair, eyes sharp and cautious. She had seen enough celebrity confrontations over the years to sense when the temperature in the room was about to spike. The first few minutes went as expected. Jamie joked about the long hours on set, the grueling preparation for his role, and even threw in an impression of one of his co-stars, drawing laughter from the audience. The applause was genuine warm, until Joy shifted in her seat. "So, Jamie," she said in that trademark conversational tone of hers, "this new movie of yours, it's powerful, no doubt about that. But you've had your own share of, let's call them, controversies. Some people say you're channeling that in your performance. I mean, you've had some very public struggles in your personal life. Were you really ready to go that deep, or is this just good acting?" The audience gave a collective, subtle murmur, that soft, rippling sound that live audiences make when they feel a boundary has just been brushed. Jamie's smile lingered for a split second too long. It was the kind of smile that looked real until you realized it wasn't moving to his eyes anymore. His hands, resting on the edge of the table, flexed almost imperceptibly. "I'm always ready to go deep for the work," he said slowly, his voice even but with an edge that fans of his stand-up might recognize. The edge that comes just before he flips the tone of a room. "But I didn't know we were going to go that deep today." There was a laugh from the audience, nervous and scattered. Jamie leaned back in his chair, crossing one leg over the other, trying to maintain composure. Joy tilted her head, eyes gleaming with the curiosity of a journalist who sensed she had struck something raw. "Well, you've always been honest with your fans. They know you've had highs and lows. Don't you think that honesty is part of what makes your performances so real?" Jamie's gaze shifted down, then back up at Joy. His jaw tightened just slightly. The cameras caught it. The director in the control room leaned forward toward the monitor, sensing a moment. "Honesty's important," Jamie said, still measured. "But sometimes honesty gets turned into headlines, and headlines ain't always the truth." The audience clapped, a few cheers rising from the back rows. It wasn't just support, it was a warning. They could feel the heat rising. Joy gave a small shrug. "Sure, but people also want to understand the man behind the talent. For example," she glanced at her notes, then locked eyes with Jamie again. "Your recent health scare, that was huge news. A lot of people were worried about you. But some critics said you weren't transparent enough about what really happened. Were you hiding something?" The question dropped like a glass shattering in the middle of a quiet room. The audience gasped audibly this time. Even Sunny raised her eyebrows and shot a quick glance at Whoopi, who now leaned forward, elbows on the table, as if bracing for impact. Jamie's expression changed instantly. The polite facade evaporated, replaced by something darker, sharper. He inhaled through his nose, his shoulders straightening. "Hiding something?" His voice was no longer smooth. It was deeper, rougher. "Joy, you think going through what I went through, barely making it out the other side, you think that was something I owed everybody a play-by-play on? That I was sitting there thinking, oh, let me hold back some juicy details for later? I was fighting for my life. The room fell into an uneasy silence. Even the audience, usually quick to fill tense gaps with applause or nervous laughter, seemed frozen. Joy, for a fleeting second, looked taken aback. But she recovered, her journalistic instincts urging her forward. Of course, nobody's questioning your struggle. But when you're a public figure, people feel like... No, Jamie cut in, his voice rising a notch. That's the problem right there. People feel like... They feel like they deserve to know everything. But let me tell you something, they don't. Not about my health. Not about what I went through in that hospital bed. That was between me, my family, and God. The audience erupted into applause, a wave of support crashing over the set. Jamie didn't look at them. He was still locked on Joy, his eyes burning with something unspoken. Sunny shifted in her seat, clearing her throat as if she might step in, but Whoopi raised one hand subtly, signaling her to wait. Joy tried to soften her tone. Jamie, I think what people are trying to say is that they care. Jamie leaned forward now, his hands flat on the table, the cameras catching every flex of his fingers. You don't show you care by prying into somebody's pain. You don't show it by questioning how much they share. I almost didn't walk out of that hospital. And the first thing I hear when I come back is people asking if I was hiding something. That's not caring, Joy. That's curiosity dressed up as concern. A heavy silence filled the studio. In the control room, the producers exchanged looks. This wasn't the light-hearted morning segment they'd planned for. But they knew they were capturing television gold, raw, unfiltered, and unforgettable. Whoopi finally spoke, her tone calm but firm, like a steady hand on a tilting ship. Let's take a breath here. Jamie, we're glad you're here and healthy. Joy, I know you were trying to get at something deeper, but maybe this isn't the way. Jamie's chest rose and fell visibly as he sat back, the muscles in his jaw still tense. He let out a breath, then gave a small, almost disbelieving laugh, the kind that carries more frustration than humor. You know, he said, softer now but still cutting. I've been on stages my whole life. I've been heckled, I've been booed, I've had to laugh things off. But this being asked to justify why I didn't share my pain while I was in it, that hits different. The audience applauded again, this time slower, more thoughtful. Joy opened her mouth as if to respond, then closed it. For once, she seemed unsure of how to continue. Whoopi gave the cameras a quick glance, her years of experience telling her this was the moment to go to commercial. But the producers in her ear were whispering, keep rolling. And so the tension lingered, hanging over the table like a storm cloud refusing to pass. The studio audience was unusually quiet when the cameras kept rolling. The usual chatter and rustling of people in the stands had been replaced by a hushed tension, the kind that makes every cough sound louder than it should. Jamie Foxx's eyes still lingered on Joy Behar. His shoulders were square, his breathing controlled but visible, like someone trying not to let the emotions spill over. The smile that had charmed millions was gone. In its place was a steadiness that felt like a drawn bowstring, pulled back and waiting. Joy, ever the seasoned talk show host, adjusted in her seat, but there was a flicker, just the smallest, of unease in her expression. She was used to throwing questions like curveballs and watching her guests fumble. But Jamie wasn't fumbling. He was standing his ground, and the audience could feel the shift in power. Sunny Hostin broke the silence first, her voice careful, diplomatic. Jamie, I think everyone here respects what you've been through. And I think a lot of fans they felt scared when you were gone for a while. Maybe that's why there was so much speculation. It wasn't meant to question your privacy. Jamie turned his head toward her, his expression softening slightly, but not losing its edge. I get that, Sunny. I really do. But there's a line. You don't ask somebody who just crawled back from the edge to give you a blow-by-blow. You don't ask that on live TV like it's just another headline. The audience applauded again, this time more firmly, more certain of where they stood. Joy leaned forward, her hands clasped in front of her on the table. Jamie, look, I wasn't trying to be cruel. I think sometimes in this chair, you ask the questions people are wondering at home. I've always believed in being upfront. Maybe I asked it the wrong way, but it wasn't about attacking you. Jamie gave her a look that wasn't angry anymore. It was disappointed, the kind that could cut deeper than rage. Joy, I've been around this game long enough to know when a question is just curiosity, and when it's got a little something else behind it. You could have asked me about the movie, about the art, about why I chose that role. Instead, you went straight for the wound. The cameras caught a close-up of Joy's reaction. For the first time in a long while, the audience saw her shift in her seat. She tried to keep her composure, but there was a tension in her smile that betrayed her discomfort. Whoopi cleared her throat, breaking the heavy air. Okay, she said, her voice low but firm. I think we need to give Jamie the space to say what he wants to say. We all know sometimes we cross lines we don't mean to, but we can't ignore when it lands wrong. So, Jamie, what do you want to say about that time in your life? On your terms. Jamie looked at her, then at the audience, rows of people sitting in silence, leaning forward, waiting. My terms, he repeated, almost to himself. He let out a breath, leaning back in his chair as if deciding whether to open a door he had kept closed for months. You know what? I'll tell you this much. There were nights I thought I wasn't going to wake up. There were moments when my family had to sit by that hospital bed, praying I'd make it. That's not the kind of story you package up for a talk show. That's the kind of thing you hold close because it's too real to turn into content. The audience reacted with soft murmurs, some nodding, some pressing their hands together as if in silent prayer. Jamie's eyes shifted back to Joy. So when you sit there and ask if I was hiding something, it feels like you're asking if my pain wasn't real enough for the public. And that, Joy, that's why I snapped. That's why I can't just laugh it off. The weight of his words hung in the air. The set, usually bright and lively, felt strangely small and intimate. The studio lights seemed dimmer, as if even they knew to soften their glow in that moment. Joy blinked, her usual quick wit failing her. I didn't mean it that way, she said quietly, almost as if to herself. I really didn't. Jamie's tone softened, but his voice still carried that quiet intensity. I know, but meaning and impact aren't the same thing. The impact was that you took me back to those nights in that hospital. You made it feel like I had to defend my right to keep parts of my life private. From the side, Sonny nodded. That's fair. We forget sometimes that just because someone's in the public eye, we don't own their story. The audience clapped again, this time more warmly, as if in agreement with Jamie's point rather than just the drama of the moment. But the calm was short-lived. A voice from the back of the audience, someone bold enough to shout, rang out over the soft applause. We just wanted to know if you're okay. Jamie turned in his seat, scanning the faces in the crowd until he found the man who'd spoken. His expression softened further. Brother, I appreciate that. I do. I'm okay. I'm here. But you gotta understand, sometimes the way you ask that question can cut deeper than you know. The audience member nodded, and a ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd, as if everyone had been reminded that there was a human being behind the headlines. Whoopi, sensing the temperature in the room had shifted, leaned forward again. You know, this is the part of live television that people never see coming. Real moments. I think we're all glad you're here to even have this conversation, Jamie. Jamie managed a small smile then, the first genuine one since the segment began. Me too. Trust me. I didn't think I'd be sitting in this chair again, doing press, talking about a movie. And I don't take that for granted. For a moment, it seemed as though the tension was easing, the storm beginning to pass. But Joy, perhaps trying to reclaim her footing, spoke again. So, if you could go back, would you have been more open with your fans during that time? The room tensed all over again. Jamie's expression shifted once more, the smile fading as quickly as it had come. He let out a low, humorless laugh. You see? That's the problem. I just explained why I kept it private, and you're asking if I regret it, like there's something to apologize for. Joy tried to interject. I'm just saying a lot of fans felt. Jamie raised his voice slightly, not shouting, but enough to cut her off. I don't live my life based on what fans feel. I owe them when I'm fighting for my life. That's not how it works. That's not how I work. The crowd erupted into applause, louder and more supportive than before. Some even stood briefly, a small standing ovation that sent a ripple of energy through the studio. Jamie's voice dropped again, quieter but sharper, every word landing like a strike. People forget. I'm not a headline. I'm not a rumor. I'm a man, a father, a son. And when I was in that bed, the last thing on my mind was giving updates to strangers. I was thinking about making it to the next morning. That's it. Whoopi glanced toward the control room again, but no signal came to cut to commercial. The producers were glued to their monitors, unwilling to miss a single second of this raw, unfiltered exchange. Joy exhaled, her eyes dropping for a moment to her hands folded on the table. When she looked back up, there was a hint of contrition in her eyes. I hear you. I do. Maybe I pushed too hard. I'm glad you're here to tell your story your way. Jamie nodded slightly, as if acknowledging her words but not fully accepting them as an apology. The audience stayed quiet, sensing they were witnessing a rare moment of television that wasn't scripted, wasn't staged, something real. In the back, the floor manager held up a hand, signaling that they had 2 minutes before the next scheduled break. Jamie leaned back in his chair, finally letting his hands drop into his lap. His breathing had slowed, his expression settling into something calmer, but his eyes still held that flicker of hurt that no amount of applause could erase. "Look," he said finally, his tone more measured now. "I didn't come here to fight. I came here to talk about the work. But I guess sometimes the work and the life overlap in ways you can't separate. I just hope people understand that there's a line, and that line matters." The audience responded with another wave of applause, softer this time, almost reverent. Whoopi nodded solemnly. "I think we all get it now." Jamie offered a small, tight smile. "I hope so." The director's voice crackled in the host's earpieces, urging them to wrap up the segment. But in the studio, it felt like the moment was still unfinished, like a storm cloud that hadn't fully emptied itself yet. As the cameras slowly zoomed in on Jamie's face, capturing the quiet resolve in his expression, the screen faded to a brief commercial break. But backstage, the tension was still very much alive. The real aftermath, the conversations, the whispers, the online reaction already brewing, was just beginning. The moment the cameras cut to the commercial break, the atmosphere on set shifted like a storm breaking over the horizon. The bright stage lights softened, the hum of the audience became a rising murmur, and the controlled professionalism of the live broadcast dissolved into a swirl of hushed voices, darting glances, and tense movements. Jamie Foxx stayed in his chair, his body still, his expression unreadable, but his eyes followed Joy as she leaned slightly back, her fingers fidgeting with her cue cards. Whoopi spoke first, her voice low, meant only for the table but still audible to the few microphones that hadn't yet been switched off. "Jamie," she said carefully, "you handled yourself. That wasn't easy." Jamie tilted his head slightly toward her, but didn't speak. He glanced instead at the studio audience, where people were still buzzing in their seats, some whispering, some shaking their heads. It was as if no one could quite believe what they had just witnessed live. Joy broke the silence, her voice smaller now, stripped of the on-air bravado. "I wasn't trying to ambush you, Jamie. I really wasn't." Jamie turned his gaze back to her, slow and deliberate. His voice, when it came, was quiet but firm. "Intent and impact," he said, repeating his earlier words. "You might not have meant it that way, but that doesn't change how it landed." The floor manager appeared at the edge of the set, headset slightly askew, speaking quickly. "We're back in 90 seconds. Everyone take a breath. Please." Whoopi sighed, leaning back in her chair, clearly wishing the break could be longer. 90 seconds isn't enough for this one," she muttered. Jamie finally stood, adjusting the jacket of his tailored suit. He moved a few steps away from the table, closer to the edge of the stage, his back to the cameras. He wasn't pacing, just standing, like a man trying to gather himself before stepping back into a ring. From the audience, a few brave voices called out words of encouragement. "We love you, Jamie," one woman said, her voice tremulous but strong. Jamie turned his head slightly, offering a small nod and the faintest smile. That single gesture sent a ripple of applause through the crowd, a spontaneous outpouring that startled even the production crew. Behind the scenes, in the control room, producers were arguing in hushed tones over whether to steer the next segment back to the movie or address the confrontation head-on. One executive muttered into his headset, "This is going viral. Just let it play out. Don't try to clean it up." Back at the table, Joy set down her cards and leaned slightly toward Sunny, speaking under her breath. "Do you think I went too far?" Sunny gave her a sidelong glance. Her voice was measured but honest. "I think you touched something raw. Sometimes it's not the question, it's the timing." Joy exhaled, rubbing her forehead. For a moment, the veteran host looked tired, as if the weight of her years in the hot seat had caught up to her all at once. The countdown to return from break began. 10 seconds. 9. The studio audience grew quiet again, sensing that the show, and perhaps the conflict, was far from over. As the camera's red lights blinked back on, the cheerful theme music played, a strangely jarring contrast to the solemn mood that lingered in the studio. Whoopi leaned in, her expression composed but still carrying a trace of tension. "We're back," she announced, her voice smooth but edged with restraint. "Before we move forward, I think it's important to acknowledge that live television brings real emotions to the surface. We don't always get it right, but sometimes It's the conversations we didn't plan for that matter the most. The camera cut to Jamie, who was now seated again, hands folded in front of him. His face was calm, but his eyes betrayed the embers of lingering frustration. Joy spoke next, her tone softer than before. Jamie, I hope you know, we weren't trying to take anything from you. Sometimes I forget that a question can open a wound that hasn't fully healed. Jamie's gaze shifted to her, steady but less sharp now. I get that, but you have to understand, just because I'm sitting in this chair promoting a movie doesn't mean I'm ready to unpack everything I've lived through. I'm still figuring it out myself. The audience applauded, more gently this time, like a collective sigh of empathy. Sonny leaned in, eager to bridge the moment. Jamie, I think what's coming through here is that people do care. But maybe we all need to think about how we show that care. Jamie nodded slowly. Yeah, care isn't about digging. It's about respect. The camera caught Joy's subtle nod in response. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was as close as she could offer in that moment. The conversation shifted briefly to the movie, its themes of perseverance and hope, its personal significance to Jamie. But the tension never fully left the room. It lingered beneath the surface, like an undercurrent pulling at every word. In the audience, a young woman raised her hand when the show opened for a quick Q&A. Mr. Fox, she said, her voice carrying across the studio, I just wanted to say, you don't owe us your pain. We're just glad you're okay. Jamie looked at her, his expression softening further. Thank you, he said simply. That means more than you know. The moment drew warm applause, a flicker of healing in the otherwise fraught atmosphere. But as the segment wrapped and the show moved to its final commercial break, the real storm began. Not on the stage, but behind it. Backstage, producers huddled with PR representatives, voices hushed but urgent. They were already drafting statements, anticipating headlines. Social media was already ablaze, their assistants reported, with hashtags like hashtag Jamie Foxx speaks and hashtag The View Confrontation trending within minutes. Jamie exited the stage quietly, escorted by a publicist who looked as though she was ready to shield him from the barrage of questions that would surely follow. The hum of whispered conversations trailed in his wake. In the green room, he finally let out a long, weary breath. His assistant handed him a bottle of water, which he accepted wordlessly. For the first time since the confrontation began, he sat back and closed his eyes, shoulders sagging. Across the hall, Joy was sitting with her own team, staring down at her phone. The flood of notifications was relentless. Messages from colleagues, texts from friends, and the beginnings of online commentary that ranged from sympathetic to sharply critical. Sonny stepped into the green room where Jamie Saturday, you okay? She asked quietly. Jamie opened his eyes and managed a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I've been through worse. But I didn't expect to have to fight that fight today. Sonny nodded, leaning against the wall. Sometimes the real conversations aren't the ones you plan. He chuckled softly, though the sound carried more exhaustion than amusement. Yeah, guess I should be used to that by now. Meanwhile, in the studio hallway, a young production assistant scrolled through their phone wide-eyed. Jamie, you're trending everywhere, they blurted as they passed by. Like everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. The clip's already gone viral. Jamie let out a slow breath and shook his head. Figures. Back in the control room, one producer leaned back in his chair, a look of stunned satisfaction on his face. This, he said to no one in particular, is going to dominate headlines for days. By the time Jamie left the building, the sidewalk outside was already dotted with reporters and fans, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. His publicist stepped in front of him, shielding him as they made their way to the car, but not before a reporter called out. Jamie, do you have anything to say about what happened with Joy Behar today? Jamie paused at the car door, glancing back over his shoulder. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but unmistakably firm. I said what I needed to say. The car door shut, muffling the sounds of the crowd as the vehicle pulled away into the fading light of the afternoon. Back inside the studio, Joy stood at the window of her dressing room, staring out at the gathering media vans parked across the street. Her phone buzzed again in her hand. Another notification, another headline. The weight of the day's events pressed down on her shoulders as she realized the conversation wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The confrontation had moved beyond the walls of the studio, beyond the set of The View. It was now a story the whole world was watching, dissecting, and debating. And as the night fell over the city, The clash between Jamie Foxx and Joy Behar was just beginning to ripple across the media landscape. A storm that promised to reshape not just the narrative of that day's show, but perhaps the way celebrities and the public confronted each other on live television. By nightfall, the confrontation between Jamie Foxx and Joy Behar had become more than just a tense exchange on live television. It had become a cultural moment, the kind of moment that dominates dinner table conversations, sparks endless social media threads, and shifts the dynamic between celebrity and audience. The clip of Jamie's voice breaking slightly as he said, "That was between me, my family, and God," had been shared millions of times before midnight. On Twitter, the hashtag #RespectJamie surged to the top of trending topics, while hashtag Team Joy emerged as a counterpoint from those defending the host's journalistic style. Memes flooded Instagram, and TikTok was filled with emotional edits of Jamie's words set to somber music. In Los Angeles, Jamie sat in his quiet home, lit only by the glow of his phone's screen as he scrolled through the storm he had unwittingly unleashed. His daughter texted him late that night. "Dad, everyone's talking about it. I'm proud of you. You stood up for yourself." He stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Love you. That's all that matters." But the weight of the day still sat heavy on his shoulders. He had gone to the View to promote a movie, not to reopen the darkest chapter of his life. Yet somehow, that raw honesty had resonated more deeply than anything scripted could have. Across the country, Joy Behar sat alone in her Manhattan apartment. The city outside her window glowed with its usual restless energy, but inside the air felt heavy still. Her phone lay face down on the coffee table, vibrating intermittently with calls and messages she wasn't ready to answer. A news anchor's voice drifted from the television. Tonight, reactions continued to pour in after Jamie Foxx's emotional response to a question on The View. The exchange is sparking debate about how much privacy public figures are entitled to. Joy muted the TV and leaned back in her chair. For the first time in years, she felt as if the very tool that had built her career, the hard, probing question, had also betrayed her. She wondered if she'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Meanwhile, the morning shows picked up the story for their late-night broadcasts. On CNN, a panel of media commentators debated whether Joy's question had been a fair journalistic inquiry or an insensitive invasion of privacy. One commentator said, "This is a turning point. It's no longer enough to say, the public has a right to know. The question is, at what cost?" On TikTok, a young fan posted a shaky video from the studio audience earlier that day. Her voice, filled with emotion, said, "I was there. You could feel the room go cold." When Jamie looked at her and said he'd been fighting for his life, it was like we were all holding our breath. That clip alone amassed over 5 million views overnight. By morning, the tabloids splashed the incident across their front pages. Headlines screamed, "Jamie Foxx's fury shakes daytime TV." Joy Behar's question sparks emotional live TV meltdown. Fans rally behind Jamie Foxx. "You don't owe us your pain." Producers of The View held an emergency meeting before the next day's taping. The question was whether Joy should address the confrontation on air. Some argued for a formal apology. Others insisted it would look like weakness. Joy herself sat quietly in the corner, unusually subdued. Whoopi Goldberg, as always, cut through the noise. "We can't pretend it didn't happen, but we also can't turn it into a spectacle. It was real. Let's treat it as real." Later that day, as the studio audience filed in for the next show, the atmosphere was different. Gone was the easy buzz of daytime chatter. In its place was a kind of reverent anticipation. Everyone knew they were stepping into the aftermath of something larger than the usual celebrity interview. When the cameras rolled, Whoopi opened the show. Before we get to today's topics, I think we need to take a moment to talk about what happened here yesterday. Live television is unpredictable. Emotions run high. Sometimes we cross lines we don't mean to. Yesterday was one of those days. She looked toward Joy, who shifted in her seat, hands clasped tightly. Joy leaned toward her microphone. Her voice was quieter than the audience was used to hearing. "I asked Jamie a question that I thought was fair in the moment, but I understand now that it touched a part of his life that was still too raw. I want to say to him and to anyone watching who's been through something similar, I'm sorry." There was a murmur from the audience, followed by gentle applause. Online, clips of that apology went viral within hours, sparking new discussions. Many praised Joy for owning her misstep. Others said it was too little, too late. But the conversation had shifted from outrage to something more introspective, a national debate about boundaries, empathy, and the cost of public scrutiny. That evening, Jamie appeared in a short video on his own social media account. Sitting casually in a hoodie and ball cap, without the polish of a talk show set, he spoke directly to the camera. "Look," he said, his tone calm and measured. "Yesterday was intense. I didn't expect it to get that emotional. But I appreciate the love I've been seeing. I'm okay. I just hope we all remember that no one owes their pain to the public. We share what we can, when we can. And that's enough." The video racked up millions of views in mere hours, with comments pouring in from fans, fellow actors, and even medical professionals who thanked him for speaking openly about the importance of respecting personal healing. That night, on entertainment networks and news broadcasts alike, analysts hailed the confrontation as a watershed moment, one that might change how interviewers approach sensitive topics with public figures. But for Jamie, it wasn't about headlines or public discourse. It was about something quieter, more personal. He had drawn a line in the sand, and in doing so, he had reminded himself, and millions of viewers, of his own worth beyond the spotlight. In living rooms across the country, people debated who was in the right. Was Joy simply doing her job, asking the tough questions? Or had she crossed a line that no host should cross, no matter how curious the public might be? The conversation raged on through the weekend, but one thing was certain: no one would forget that moment. Not the audience in the studio, not the millions watching at home, and certainly not the two people at the center of it all. For Jamie, the day after the confrontation was surprisingly peaceful. He spent the morning walking through his garden, phone in his pocket, deliberately ignoring the constant stream of notifications. A neighbor who passed by called out, "We're all rooting for you, Jamie." Jamie smiled, waved, and for the first time since that day on The View, felt a measure of peace. In New York, Joy walked into the studio again with her usual poise, but those who worked with her noticed a change, a subtle softness in her demeanor. Perhaps the confrontation had reminded her, as it had reminded Jamie, that the people behind the headlines carried burdens no headline could ever capture. By the end of that week, the frenzy had begun to settle. The viral clips were still circulating, but the tone of the discussion had shifted. It was no longer just about the confrontation itself, it was about what it revealed. The fine line between curiosity and intrusion, between journalism and empathy. And as the story began to fade from the news cycle, the lessons it sparked lingered in the minds of those who had watched it unfold in real time. For the millions who had seen the confrontation live or online, the moment stood as a reminder. Fame doesn't erase humanity, and even the strongest among us have the right to guard their pain. The screen fades from the chaotic montage of headlines and social media posts to a dark background with white text. What do you think? Was Joy's question fair, or did she cross the line? The narrator's voice cuts in, calm but compelling. This story isn't just about a clash on live television. It's about empathy. It's about the lines we draw between the public and the private. And it's about the power of speaking up, even when the world is watching. The voice softens, shifting to a personal appeal. If you've been following this journey, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Whose side are you on? Did Jamie do the right thing by standing his ground? Or was Joy just doing her job? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The tone brightens slightly, carrying the channel's signature call to action. And if you want more powerful, dramatic stories like this, real moments that reveal the truth behind the headlines, make sure to hit that subscribe button for Prime Narrator, and don't forget to like this video. Your voice matters, and your support keeps these stories coming. The screen fades to black as the outro music plays, carrying with it the lingering weight of the confrontation. A story that began as just another interview but ended as a powerful conversation about respect, privacy, and the human heart behind fame.